Welcome, adventurers, to the podcast that goes through everything gaming, with your hosts Benji and Donchap. Wherever you're listening in, get ready to shuffle those cards, roll the dice, and count your victory points, because this is Play Up and Chat. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the podcast that goes through everything gaming. My name is Benji,
And I am Donchap.
and we are so excited to dive into episode 4.
On today's episode, we're going to be discussing about different styles of RPGing.
And if you like our content, you again follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon at patreon.com/playupmt.
You can support us for as little as €3 per month. And for this episode, we are dedicating it to
Rebecca
Rebecca
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, you're awesome.
So heading straight into the episode here, different styles of RPGing. What do we mean by that? So basically, we categorized it into 4 different styles. And we are going to be covering one-shots, dungeon crawlers, campaigns, and story-driven. And we're going to explain as what is the difference between them and how you can run these.
Yeah, definitely. So, jumping in, we are talking about mainly tabletop pen and paper RPGs for this episode. And the first on the list is the one shots. Now, usually, one shots can be bought from your favorite stores for your favorite games. Usually, you can find them out of the box. Mainly, you're going to be using pre written stories and pre written character sheets.
Yep, that's correct. So basically, you're gonna pop open this, one story, which takes about 3 to 4 hours to complete, give or take. Sometimes even shorter, depends on how the design of the game is and the story is. Like for example, Ben. I remember in our early friendship, we gave you an out of the box RPG, right? Which was a one shot, the Star Wars one.
Yeah, you gifted me an awesome game, the Star Wars FFG. It came with its own introductory story with a number of pre written character sheets, and it was so easy to just open it up, read the quick rules, and jump into playing. It's like, I think, one of the most fun parts about these pre made one shots.
Exactly, and you can also find these one shots if you love to role play or have experience in role playing. You can find them online. Most of them are free. There's a generous community out there, always writing content for hardcore RPG players, and there's also stuff that you can actually buy if you support a specific dungeon master or a specific writer of a certain campaign design or something of the sort. There are people that actually dedicate a lot of time to run one shots. And usually, I remember back in the day, one shots were found like for Dungeons and Dragons as magazines. I don't know if you knew that, Ben.
I don't actually remember that myself because I didn't actually get into RPGs, like D&D and such, until I met you a few years ago, actually. So I'm not quite familiar with these magazines. But how did they pan out? What was inside them?
So basically, some of the stuff would be level based, right? So it's going to give you
Okay.
a level of what the character should be. So let's say, for example, it's a level 3 to 5. So you know that if you're going to build a character, or you already have a character ready, or maybe you want to find a pre-made character sheet, you have to find it within that level base, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Then you have the first 2 3 pages is introducing you to the story because it's going to take the perspective of dungeon master what he should be running, so a bit of backstory, what npcs to prepare. And then you have these sections where you have the narration starting. So usually it either starts in a tavern, on the road to the main story, and you start going through it page by page. It has all the pre-made stuff. It actually introduced some new mechanics and some new skills for certain classes and races that you can use. Had the monsters pre-prepared. It's basically pick off the shelf, open the book, do your homework, and then tell your friends, guys, I've got an awesome one shot prepared for you. Come on over, let's, get some snacks and let's do this.
Nice, yeah. So it doesn't really sound like much has changed in the off-the-shelf sort of one-shots from these magazines that you're saying to like the one-shots that we can purchase nowadays.
Well, yes and no, because taking a off the shelf box, like for example what we got for you, or what you guys got for me for my birthday this year, it has actually a small one shot with everything ready inside of it, which then can extend into a campaign. But we'll talk about that in a bit. What they have is they have the dice ready. Some of them come up with dungeon master screens, so you have a bit more content, and obviously the price matches what you're going to find in the box.
Okay, yeah. So we're saying that the more modern like one-shots are more targeted for perhaps maybe newer players out there who don't have all of the items ready to jump into a game.
Exactly. And while the magazines actually focused more around already skilled players or veteran players that know how to play the game, there's no rules involved. You pick it off the shelf. It was quite cheap back then to just pick up a magazine and just put it into your binder and you run the one shot. So there were no dice involved or any of the stuff that you find today.
Okay, well, I'm kind of a fan of the little miscellaneous that you get with the one-shot starter packs. Like some of them come with really nice tokens as well. It's not just dice that they come with.
Yeah, I really love the maps that they come up with pre-made. Some of the magazines, if I remember correctly, had like cutouts for you at the end.
Oh yeah, well, cutouts aren't the same as some of these tokens that they come with. But I do agree with you. Yeah, the maps are gorgeous. Like, and even with that Star Wars FFG that we were talking about earlier, it does actually come with a map inside as well. And I think your D&D one as well had a map in it.
Yes, it has a double-sided map. Actually, coming to think of it, I did buy myself a Lord of the Rings themed RPG, which was a one-shot too, and it had the figurines. So it was literally a 3D model, miniature size of the characters you're going to be playing. And then you had the map inside, but you didn't have the rest, like the dice and stuff. You just had the story, the map, and the characters.
Nice. So it's not always about just story-driven one-shots, and like RPGs aren't just always based around the story, are they? Like sometimes, even hinting back at our previous episode, sometimes RPGs can be a bit more linear, like dungeon crawlers.
Yes, exactly. So dungeon crawlers is a style that one can do, which is basically it's in the name itself. You create a dungeon, you create a layer, and it's basically one step to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's just about getting to the big boss, the big bad guy.
Yeah, now listeners, don't get us wrong. Sometimes some one shots can seem like they're dungeon crawlers if they're played that way, and some dungeon crawlers may have an element of story in them. But what we're talking about here are more like particularly just focus. So, like jump in, combat after combat, very linear, and as you said, Don, just the goal to defeat the big bad at the end of this dungeon run.
Exactly. So basically, what we're looking at is you have a setup where you're going to be challenged by the system and the dungeon master to make several combat checks, right? Rarely do you have like perception checks or stuff like that. So it's basically testing the skills that require strength, dex, perhaps saving throws for the most part, with very little role playing involved. While the one shot may actually give you more leeway into role playing, asking questions, because in the one shots, I guess we can mention, is that you're going to find yourself that you can role play with certain NPCs and there are pre made answers to it. While in a dungeon crawler, it's not really that straightforward.
It's actually a little funny. It's almost a little ironic here that there's, being with a style of role playing game when there's not so much role playing going on in the dungeon crawlers. But I mean, you can role play action scenes and fight scenes. As I mean, I've seen it done quite a few times in some of the games that I've been in, and that makes it more fun.
Also, what I love about dungeon crawlers personally is, as a dungeon master, you don't have to think too much about the story and what it entails. If you just feel like playing a game of D&D and you want to make something quick, it can be considered almost as a one shot. I love to bring out dungeon crawlers as labyrinths. So basically, once again, there's not much of role playing involved into it per se. The only role playing that I see from my characters' end is that they portray their character, what they would do in certain scenarios or how they would think. Some of them are reckless, some of them are more cautious to enter one room and not the other. So that's what I see as a role playing aspect in it. But in my labyrinths, usually it's a dungeon crawler within itself to find your way out, or you're trying to find a specific item that you need before you kind of just head out, because the labyrinth isn't really a labyrinth per se. It's more of a twisted cave.
A twisted cave with ups and downs and turns.
You played one of my
I
labyrinths. I
did,
I
yes.
set one up for your birthday two birthdays
Yes,
ago.
you did. And yeah, it's true that maybe there might not be as much role play in the sense as talking with an NPC, for example. But the role play in itself, solving the puzzles between your characters, that can really come up useful there. And one thing that I love in dungeon crawlers are the puzzles that are in there, and the way you have to think to get out of these puzzles. Sometimes they're not straightforward, and interacting and role playing with the other members of your party is definitely going to help you get out sooner.
Exactly. So when you're thinking dungeon crawler, guys, don't just think next door fight creatures, next door fight creatures, next door fight creatures. We're talking more of, listen, it's all about skill checks, rolling more dice than role playing at this point. So that's what we consider as a dungeon crawler here. And they're quite fun to set up and play. I think they're more fun to play than setting up, from my experience, to be honest, especially if
Yeah.
you're building one from scratch.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the amount of thinking that goes into creating certain puzzles, and just putting the way the rooms link into each other. A lot more thought goes into it than most players think.
And then if you have a rogue involved and you have a bunch of trapped rooms, immediately you have the rogue checking for that, and you hear him shout out, "It's a trap!"
And little nod to the Star Wars over there.
Before we carry on into our episode, we do have our sponsors to mention, guys. So, really quickly, we just want to thank them because all of this is possible thanks to them. We have the Miniature Corner Studio, which you can find them on Facebook, and they do 3D modeling, 3D printing, and they're giving our listeners a discount code of 10% when you order from them, which you can use PlayUp21. It's one word, PlayUp21, and this will give you a 10% off your bill.
And the next sponsor is thegianttower.com. Now, Giant's Tower is there for anyone who's looking to pick up any pre made 3D printed items for running any of these RPGs that we're talking about. They are offering our listeners a 15% off their total bill if you use the promo code, all capital letters, PlayUp15. That's all caps, PlayUp15. The best part about these guys is that they ship worldwide. So hit them up. Order something awesome.
And the sponsor that we are mentioning last, but has been with us since the beginning of our journey as the revamped PlayUp, is warmongergamesmota.com. These guys are basically our local online game store here, and they're giving us a discount code of 10% off any purchase of board games which are not pre-discounted. The 10% code that they gave us this time round, which expires on the 28th of March, is PlayUp NC 2830. That's PlayUp NC 2830.
Yeah, if you guys are going to get yourself any of these board games or 3D printed miniatures, or you want something custom made, it really helps us out. It helps out these businesses as well. And they do great stuff. So go ahead, check them out.
Carrying on to our little Podcast here, episode 4 about different styles of RPGing. We're moving on to our favorites.
Oh, it
Uh,
definitely has to be one of my favorites.
Campaign. So, what is a campaign, Ben?
Yeah, so a campaign, Don and listeners, is when you have a number of stories linking together in an overarching story that can last almost forever. I mean, I know of a campaign in overseas in Canada that has been going on for over 30 years.
Oh my
But
god.
I know it's amazing. But I mean, what we're talking about here is more like a big overarching story where the DM really gets down into the details of your player's campaign, your player's backstories, and builds the campaign around those different, backstories.
So we're looking at campaigns related. I mean, we know Critical Role, for example, they have a long campaign ongoing. I think they're in season 2 by now, with a couple of episodes in the hundreds under their belts. I know there's podcasts out there that also do campaigns. It's not another D&D podcast. They do also campaigns. So if you want D&D related stuff, there's lots to follow campaign wise. There are others like the Star Wars one we mentioned, the Witcher one. I just recently found a group that done a Witcher campaign that does not involve the traditional Witcher guys. So we're not talking about the main characters at all. They just created their own version. Campaign wise, what are we looking at? So, one of the campaigns I ran, for example, is I come up with a story that is going to affect a specific part of a world or pre existing or homebrewed, right? And you're going to challenge your players to find a way how to get around it and solve the issue in front of them. Now, this is not as simple as unlocking a door. This is more complex. It takes thinking, putting pieces together, creating these cliffhangers for the next time you meet. There's a lot of work to be done from the dungeon master side. Players have to kind of work together towards the story to get to the bottom of things. One of the things that I remember doing for one of my campaigns is I made the Dragonborns the bad guys in my campaign. So basically, they decided to take over the land of Thrain. I think I was using Thrain at the time.
This is way before me.
This is way before you came in. Yeah. So basically, they're trying to take over Thrain. They were coming from the north, and conveniently, the heroes of the campaign were coming from the south. So they met in the middle of Thrain, and they had to fight it out into a big battle. So I created these allies, and they had to convince kingdoms this is the true threat. It was quite nice to see it unfold, and even certain character developments that you see for certain players, really beautifully done. Back then, I didn't really include backstories simply because it was my campaign and I just wanted to run the thing, and players just played whatever they wanted to play and made it mean something to them. So, yeah, that was kind of how you run a campaign. You just build this really amazing long story, plot holes for players to decipher, a lot of encounters, and so forth.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of campaigns in general is that it takes a long time to get through the entire story, in the sense that you've got more opportunities to invest yourself into your characters, into the other players' characters, into the overarching story. Like, unlike one shots where you sit down, go through a short adventure, 3 to 4 hours. We're talking about multiple, almost quote unquote one shots after each other that all link together and that all have an effect on the overarching story. And I think that's the beauty of it, when you can invest so much time, energy, and emotion into seeing these characters and come alive in a story.
That's right. So now you would ask the question perhaps campaigns, do you have to create them yourself? No, you don't. I mean, if you want full control over the world and really bring your vision to the table, you can. However, if you're one of those DMs that don't have enough time on their hands, perhaps Or guiltily, you would say you're a bit lazy. You can find campaigns, again, out of a box almost.
Indeed, yeah. It's almost like they're one shots, like we talked about earlier, but they're just stretched out over a number of play sessions.
So I know for certain that Pathfinder, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, once again, Star Wars even, they have these player handbook sized books for a whole campaign that you buy. And usually they're thematic. So basically come out of a box, you have the relevant theme to them. So if it's, for example, vampire related, it's all gothic, you get the relevant Dungeon Master screen to it, cards, so on and so forth. And all you have to do as a dungeon master is just do your homework about what's already pre-written inside the book, and you just run your players from session to session and about this campaign.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great way, possibly a little easier way for a DM to set up an entire campaign as well. The only negative, possibly downside that I see to this is that if some of your players have obviously access to internet, they might be able to find some stories within the campaign which might ruin the experience just a little bit. But I mean, it's just about foretelling. So like, guys, we're going to be running this campaign. It is a pre-made campaign, so try and stick away from kind of spoilers about it, and that will help the game move better.
Yeah, I mean, it's no fun for anyone when you metagame the situation because that's what it essentially boils down to. When you look up information and you already know what hit points the monster has or what its weaknesses is without actually role playing into the scenario as if you didn't know what you're encountering for the very first time.
Yeah, I mean, possibly fun for the person who's metagaming, but definitely not fun at all for the DM who spent time putting it together. Other players who are, putting their time and emotions, into the game, investing themselves into the story and the campaign. So, maybe think twice before metagaming a little bit and foretelling the story. And but actually, talking about stories and having being story driven, in fact, is actually the last style of RPG that we want to mention today in this episode. Is that's it, story driven. Well, what can you tell us about story driven, Don?
Story driven is the moment when your character is born and has been through either a tragic background or you have a happy background and you're just off to adventuring to find the next loot. Or perhaps you are part of a very dark secret agency that you need to get your hands on certain merch that is being transported.
Or perhaps you come from a clan of cursed tabaxi trying to break the curse and find what life is like outside of it.
PlayUp Legends spoilers.
Yeah, if you guys are into that, I'm sure you'll be able to hear and watch live our upcoming sessions.
You can find the videos on YouTube a couple of weeks from the official live stream. So, story driven, what are we talking about here? Why did I do the intro the way I did? So, basically, story driven is what it says in the title, story driven. However, this is very much from the perspective of the players. The
It's
players will.
all player centered, player focused.
So, what are we talking about? Your backstory means a lot to the dungeon master. When he's designing your story, there's very much nothing off the shelf. It's nothing to do with one shots. It's nothing to do with pre written campaigns. No, 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 good sir. You, the player, have a big say on what's happening in the world. Your story influences the world and how the dungeon master is going to run his sessions. He's going to implement things that make sense to your backstory. He's going to start giving you short term goals, long term goals on what you're going to achieve. And obviously, have the emotional roller coaster ride of your life. You met your parents that you once lost. You were adopted, and then you find out why you were abandoned by your family, why your friend betrayed you at that particular outpost. All of this is inside a story driven campaign. And this is my personal favorite because you are so immersed into the campaign. You're so immersed into the story because, you're there, you're making part of history.
Yeah, so as you, the listeners, might have guessed, story driven RPGs are very much based on creativeness of the players and the DM. So there is a big element of homebrewing in the sense that the DM is going to put together the overarching story, input the villains based off of your stories and your backstories. Nothing here is out of the box. It's all custom and tailor made specifically to fit who your character is and who your character wants to be.
So, Ben, a bit of a teaser here for myself, actually, and even for the listeners. There is something that Ben has been working on for quite a while that people might be interested to because I love the game
Uh
itself,
huh.
Magic: The Gathering.
Yes, so I have been working on my own story-driven campaign for me, myself, my friends, Don included, and it's basically set on the world of Ravnica. The idea with this is we both love Magic the Gathering, as we've mentioned in previous episodes. We both love D&D. The opportunity to create a D&D based story within the world of Ravnica was something that we really, really wanted to do. So I sat down and, like you would for a campaign, I started researching. I started looking into, okay, so what is Ravnica like? What is the world like? How can my players and their backstories be fit into this this cool, new, exciting world? And the hardest part of the story-driven RPG is actually I would say actually building up the story, but I think it's more the research that goes behind the actual, let's say, plane of existence that you're going to be playing in, right? The actual world itself. So, where does your lore come from? Where do your NPCs come from? How can they interact with the characters? And I have to admit, the best basis was from my character backstories because they gave me such good ideas. And oh, to have a character, interact with the big bad from the beginning and have them and then influence the way the story pans out. It's so exciting. Like listeners, if you have the chance, if you're into D&D, if you're into any role playing game and you want to, get out of those store bought, get out of those one shots, like really just be creative. If you want to start a story driven campaign that's based in characters in real life being transformed into medieval characters from D&D and hopping over a plane of existence, do it. Find out, research, be creative, find out a way to do it. That's the way you should play.
Thank you for that example, Ben. And it's always nice to hear another dungeon master speak of this because sometimes I just feel like so much has taken examples from myself that it's nice to hear it from someone else sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have to say, I am really looking forward to this campaign, and hopefully, it might be on PlayUp for our listeners in the future.
Oh, definitely. We should plan something about that. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to follow us on our socials. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We also have Twitter now, which we're still working around how to make it more um, reachable. Let's put it like that. And don't forget, we have patreon.com/playupmt where you can support us for as little as €3 per month for the content that we create. It means a lot to us for everyone who supports us this way. Thanks to our sponsors, Warmonger Games Malta, Miniature Corner Studio.
And thegiantstower.com.
You stay safe.
See you in the next one.